Welcome to another episode of Truth UnCoiled, where we are going in depth to talk about the Murdaugh murders today. And I'm excited to talk about this because I wanted to get more in depth of the legalese of this case. And a lot of you guys had questions about it. And so this is going to look through more of my lawyer lens and give you more of a different perspective than that you've probably heard before. As you know, for a year, the central question that was surrounding the fatal shootings of Murdaugh's wife and his son were just like out there. Like, who did it? What is going on? And then after layer, this just unfolded to be one of the biggest conspiracy and just crazy cases that I think I remember and will be remembered of all times. I mean, Alec Murdaugh was, supposed to be this like big South Carolina personal injury attorney. His family was huge in the county that they were from. His father, his grandfather, his great grandfather were each elected as top prosecutors in the region that they lived in roles. And so the Murdaugh name was known by so many people. I mean, spanning almost 90 years in South Carolina. And when his wife and son were found, shot to death on their home property, it was just like basically this like unraveling of what could have happened. And Alec Murdaugh denied it. Obviously, he was like, I didn't do it. I wasn't even around. I mean, quickly his alibi became suspicious. And I say this all the time, but you know how, you say, can you get away with murder? Well, nowadays, I truly believe you cannot get away with murder. And it goes to the fact that we have so many tools today to find out where and when and who. And in this case, it was just one of those things where his alibi upheld until they were able to unravel the GPS of his car, the cell phone records, the Google records, and the DNA records, the gun records. I mean, they were able to unravel and get all of this evidence in this case to legally be able to produce a very solid case. So in the end, Alex Murdaugh was found guilty of murdering his wife and son. But he denied it all the way up, and he even denies it even today. So let's just talk about this from just a legal standpoint. Paul Murdaugh, his son, was involved in a not a murder, but in an accident where he was driving the family boat. He was extremely intoxicated. He was underage, and he ended up crashing the boat. And one of the girls on the boat flew off the boat and ended up dying. It was horrific and horrible, but that didn't make national news media. It was an accident, but a negligent accident at that. And because of it, Paul Murdaugh was being charged for basically not vehicle homicide, but he was in a boat. So the equivalent, there was a good chance that he was going to go to prison for years for this because of his underage drinking, because of how much he was drinking, and because there was evidence from testimony on the boat that the kids were telling him to slow down, that he was getting very, very aggressive and abusive on the boat. And then he sped up when, he was like, this is my boat. You don't have to tell me what to do. And he sped up the boat, and then he ended up killing Mallory. And it was just horrible. But when Alex Murdaugh's case came, where all of a sudden Paul and his wife are found murdered, it was this like unraveling to find that this family was connected to several deaths. And a couple of them are still unsolved. And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. A few of the key facts of this case. Murdaugh on June 7th, 2021, calls 911. And he calls to say that he found his lifeless body of his wife, Margaret, and Paul near the family dog kennels on their hunting lodge estate in rural Election County. Immediately on the phone, he says, I've been gone. I came back. I just came back and I just found them. And obviously authorities arrive on the scene. And Alex Murdaugh is very hysterical, but at the same time able to very articulate, I wasn't there. I just found them. He claims that he tried to, resuscitate his wife, even though he didn't have any blood on him. I mean, right away, it was a little bit of what the police officers now say, unnerving to hear what he was trying to say, to hear the information that he was so adamant to tell the police officers. And then obviously, some of the things he was saying just didn't make sense. And so, when that is going on, then obviously the police officers, and the first thing that they do is the police officers put him in a car, and instead of taking him down the police station, they basically interview him right there in the car. And Alex Murdaugh, being an attorney, should have known immediately that the first thing he should do is invoke his Fifth Amendment right to not say anything and to get an attorney. But he didn't do that. And this all goes down to the very end where Alex Murdaugh thought that he could outsmart the system. That was his first, I would say, fatal mistake in this case of not being able to get away with murder, is that he decided that he would just tell the police officer, what happened. He wasn't there. He came back, he found them. And obviously, he doesn't know what happened. He threw in this randomness that people want his family dead because of the accident that Paul caused on the boat. And even though his son had already been charged, was awaiting trial, the legal prospects of that case were going forward. So it's not like Paul Murdaugh had gotten away with murder or gotten away with the craziness. So when you see that interview in the car, that's the first thing you're thinking is I mean, he is just planting these possibilities to create doubt. And now that we've seen the entire aspects of the case, as a lawyer, you see that from a mile away. That the first thing Alec Murdaugh is doing is creating what I would say reasonable doubt so that that evidence can be used in trial to persuade a juror that they are not 100% sure. If you know anything about the legal realm, which Alex Murdaugh did because he's an attorney, is that that when you have a murder like this, I mean, the prime suspects are going to be the people closest to them, right? It's very rare to have just like a random murder. June 14th is when the coroner reveals that Margaret and Paul both suffered multiple gunshot wounds, and it was estimated that their time of death was between 9 p.m. and 9:30. And one of the things that was interesting is that the things that Alex did to try to cover up, or again, tried to make it so that he would be found not guilty. One of the things that happened was on September 4th, he was injured in a roadside shooting. And all of a sudden, you hear the videos that he called 911 saying that he had just been shot randomly. It ends up just that he hired some guy to come to the road and shoot him, and that he was doing that for insurance fraud, which again, he ended up being charged for. He ended up, being sentenced to multiple years in prison. Just another element to this case that, again, as a lawyer, just absolutely blows your mind about what he was doing. And the worst part is it didn't work because he was fine and it was a superficial gun. Like, he didn't even stay overnight in the hospital. It was then shortly after that we find out the problems within his law firm. And this just then opens up this whole entire craziness of other elements of who is Alex Murdaugh. And to summarize this, he's a personal injury attorney. We find out that he is stealing money from clients. Personal injury attorney usually has his clients sign an agreement that, they get 1/3 of whatever money they recover, or they can get upwards to 40%, 50% if they end up going to trial. And Alex Murdaugh was basically telling his clients, "Oh, I got you $200,000 in the settlement," when in reality he got 300,000, and he was taking a third of the 200,000, but then he was keeping the 100,000. So absolutely fraud, crooked. He was disbarred for this. I mean, and we find out that he had stolen millions of dollars from this firm, his family's firm. It's just funny because his excuse was, "I had a drug problem and I needed to and everybody's like, "Wait, millions of dollars for drugs like opioids?" That there was no evidence that he was actually a drug addict. And it again, this layer and this, what are we looking at that would cause you to just be like shocked, right? I mean, and that's what's the thing about the Alex Murdaugh case. If you watch the documentaries, you look at the unraveling of this, is that you're like, "Oh, there could be another thing that shocks you." Oh, there is. The biggest thing would be that his maid, or their family maid or caretaker, at their house had a few years earlier slipped at his family house, and it ended up killing her. She fell backwards and it ended up killing her. And of course, it was ruled an accident, which now looking at it, was it an accident? I don't know. That's still, he hasn't been charged for that. But what he did was he basically sued his own home insurance, which, mind you, he got just a few weeks prior to this death. He sued that and he was able to get a very, very large settlement for this maid and her family. And the family never knew about it. They never knew about it until the unraveling of these murders of his wife and his son. There was, about $500,000 that he recovered for this family, and they never got a dollar of it. You have to remember as well that the Murdaughs have one more son, Buster, who's a little bit older. I guess when you're looking at that, super sad to think about that now he's the only basically Murdaugh. Like he's out, he's, doing his thing, but he's got a dad in prison who will go to prison forever, will never see the light of the day. And then his mom and his other brother were murdered. It's just tragic. So then we start looking at the legal case of Alex Murdaugh. He has all of these charges for insurance fraud, for, all of the misdeeds he did as an attorney. And that's going to go to trial. And there's just this like constant unraveling. And the theory is that this was coming to a head where Alex Murdaugh was going to lose his job, lose his reputation, was probably going to go to jail for all of this financial fraud. And his wife found out about it and that came to a head. Or Alex didn't want her to find out about it because just that the day or the day before, we find out that he had just had a meeting with his firm. Like this was coming to a head. And then they end up unalive. Like, so the theory is that he just didn't want them to know, or she found out about it and it was easier for him to just off them. I mean, the work of a true narcissist. And then to think that he can get away with it. He's going through all these financial issues and he gets disbarred, and then we find out that he's going to plead guilty to all these financial crimes. He's going to get sentenced to years in jail while he's pleading not guilty to murder, because several months later, they finally decide to charge him with the murder. They have enough evidence. But again, we talk about what was the linchpin of the evidence to prove that Alex Murdaugh did this murder. And the linchpin was that they were finally able to get into Paul Murdaugh's phone. That's a very lengthy process, just so you know. Like, it's not like you can't go down the coroner's office and use a thumbprint to get into a phone. It's a very lengthy process. And sometimes you can't even do it. You can't get into the phone because Apple has like privacy is everything. And, anyways, Paul Murdaugh had just taken a Snapchat video minutes before he was murdered, pursuant to the coroner's time of death. And lo and behold, who's on the video? His dad. And his dad had said that he had gone up to the house, he had taken a nap, and then he had gone to his mom's house at night to visit her and then came out back and found her dead. So right there, it was proven that Alex Murdaugh completely lied about his whereabouts. I mean, that video was like, I would, and I've seen a documentary where the detective finally got that piece of evidence because they were worried about, do they have enough evidence, or is it all circumstantial that a jury is going to say, I have some doubt. And he got that video and he just couldn't believe it. It's like when you get that golden nugget as an attorney and you're just like, there's no way that they can prove their case now. Like, we have the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The detectives were like, all right, great. Handed over to the prosecutor. The prosecutor was like, heck yeah, we're going to be able to find that Alex Murdaugh, he did this because of this. And he had completely lied about it. The other thing that I think was crucial in this case was from that first video or interview when he got put in the sheriff's car and they were asking him questions, to the second time he was interviewed when they took him to the police station, to the third time he was interviewed. I'm telling you, as an attorney, you invoke your Fifth Amendment right. You don't want to incriminate yourself because it's not necessarily what you say in those interviews that are really important for the prosecution and the detectives. It's the changing of your story. And Alex Murdaugh changed his story, whether it was slightly or had some major add-ins or changed it. in those three different interviews that I believe was also crucial to the prosecution proving their case. Again, when you don't think things are going to be any crazier, we finally get to trial and they're going to put on all this evidence. And as an attorney, I'm looking at the evidence thinking this is too strong. Alex Murdaugh is going to be convicted. You then find out that Alex Murdaugh is going to testify. I mean, this is like criminal 101. Like most of the time, the person that is being accused of the crime does not testify. And that is because you are protected from self-incrimination. The Fifth Amendment right allows you to do that. But second of all, when you get up there and you say something, the prosecution is able to cross-examine you. And if you change your story, you say something that they have evidence that you're lying, a whole slew of things get to come in to show that. It's called impeachment evidence. So every prosecutor, every that is prosecuting a crime loves it when the defense gets up there because it opens up a window for them to get more evidence in that a lot of times they wouldn't be able to get in. And so when I heard that Alex Murdaugh was going to testify, the first thing I thought is he truly is a narcissist. He truly believes he can get away with murder, even with the evidence, because he is going to, thinks he's so compelling and that he's going to be so sympathetic. And that is exactly what happened. That testimony was the most self-serving testimony I've ever seen in my life. And it was not believable. He was hysterical at times. He was crying at times. He changed his story. When you have talked three different times prior to trial and then you get on trial, you better know damn well what you said in those three prior interviews to make sure that they are very, very consistent. And that just did not happen. And it was crazy. As an attorney looking at that trial, watching what was going on in that trial, I felt very confident that the jurors were going to find that he was guilty. The biggest question that was asked in trial was, why did you lie about being there? And, obviously he said he was scared. Well, yeah, you knew you were going to be the prime suspect no matter what, whether you were there or not. His alibi was weak because nobody could testify that that was his alibi. And his car, they got all the information from his car. They could see when he left the house from his cell phone. They could see what he did, how long he stayed at his mom's house. It wasn't normal for him to go to his mom's house late at night. They saw that he was speeding on the way to his mom's house. They had all of this information and it just didn't make sense. And then they found, a jacket that had remnants of blood at his mom's house. Just so much incriminating evidence. Craziest question, the question heard around the world was when the judge said, "Why did you lie?" And he looks at the judge and he says, "Oh, the tangled webs we weave." And that quote was used against him in the sentencing when the judge said, "The tangled webs you weave is what you claimed when you lied." And the judge said, "When was the lying going to stop? When was that going to stop?" And it just, you knew right then, like the judge was going to throw the book at him. He got life in prison. That's where he's sitting. But you think that you're like, okay, that's where this ends, right? Because he was convicted guilty of the murder of his wife and his son. He was found guilty on so many financial crimes. He's never going to get out of prison. But then we find out that the clerk of the court during the trial. Now, a clerk is usually I would say they're like the secretary of the judge. They're very important. They help the judge do everything that they need to do, whether it's they're sitting next to the judge, they get the judge any information, they're signing orders a lot of times. Like there's a lot of things that these clerks are doing. Supposedly, this clerk was saying things during the trial to the jurors. One of those things was she told the juror not to believe Alec Murdaugh's tears. She said things like, "Oh, you guys need to find him guilty." Not appropriate. She should never have weighed in. You don't ever want to look like you're swaying the jurors. Like I've never in my life heard of a clerk doing things like this. But the other crazy thing, before that all came out, the day after the trial concluded, this clerk, flew to New York to be on the Today Show to talk about the trial, which that was weird to me as well, because they're like an extension of the court. So it almost, in my mind, because clerks are behind the scenes, they're talking to the judge about the case, they're getting the inner thoughts of the judge on the case, and none of that should ever come back come out, because the judge is doing that in his private chambers, off the record. Like, he's entitled to talk about that so long as he is feeling confident in keeping the conversations private. But so she goes up there, she wrote a book, and then it came out that she was saying these things to these jurors. So there was just a lot of scrutiny, a lot of problems with this. And because of that, Alex Murdaugh's defense attorneys have filed a motion for mistrial based off of this. Now, the judge denied the mistrial and said, no, I don't find that this is an impropriety, but it's up on appeal right now. And I think that there is a small chance that the Court of Appeals could find that this swayed the jurors and could possibly warrant a mistrial. And there's going to be oral argument. It's going to take years before we probably get the result of it. But even still, as a lawyer, it's embarrassing to the legal system, because obviously we want people to trust what the workers of the court and what they're doing. But it also, a lot of people are like, well, what happens if Alec Murdaugh trial, if they find a mistrial, or if it's overturned? Well, they'll retry him. But the good news is Alex Murdaugh won't be out of jail, even if they reverse the finding that he's guilty for murder. I mean, he's in jail for all of these financial crimes. And so it's not going to change that. He's going to stay in jail. He's going to be there forever. So at the end of the day, Alex Murdaugh thought he could get away with murder, but the evidence was overwhelming. Alex didn't know that Paul Murdaugh had made a video of him shortly before the murders. And that obviously was the linchpin. But with the technology today, with the ability for us to track cars, track cell phones, DNA. I mean, we have gotten so good at tracking DNA that, for him to get away with this, the only way he could do it is if he was somehow going to be able to create doubt in the jurors. And he tried, those little sneaky things he said in the beginning, but the physical evidence was way too strong. And Alex Murdaugh was not going to get away with this. That's another episode of Truth Uncoiled, talking about the Murdaughs. Such an interesting case from a legal perspective. Join in next week.